We're here in the pavilion, and here we have aircraft from several different generations. One of our favorites, of course, is our original Ford Trimotor. The Ford Trimotor was one of the first successful airliners in history, and ours is probably one of the most successful examples of that. Our Ford Trimotor has over 24,000 flight hours, which on any scale is an incredible total. We got it in 1983. It was in an accident and had to be substantially restored. In fact, when it came here in 1983, we had set up fences in the back parking lot because the structure was so big we couldn't fit it in the basement to restore it. For 15 years we worked on restoring this thing, and it is truly completely restored. One of the things that the museum used to do is we would rent this out for night events where people would come dressed up in their 1920s and 1930s travel attire. We had a flight attendant that was up there with them and would feed them on their long overnight voyage in our Ford Trimotor. It's one of the first aircraft that was very successful as an airliner. That extra engine gave it a reliability that some of the twins of the era just couldn't have. In the cockpit, it's an interesting setup. Not all of the engine instruments are mounted on the dash like you'd expect because there's three different motors. Some of the engine instruments are mounted out on the pylon. So the pilot, when he wants to monitor the engine on the left, he looks out at the engine and there's a gauge for him. I have a fairly unique experience in the modern era. A friend of mine got me set up where I was able to take one of these for a flight. I actually got to physically fly one for about 45 minutes over San Diego. I can tell you it's a very unique experience, and it's quite similar to driving an old Ford truck with a lot of vibration, a lot of bouncing around. The restoration probably was one of the more difficult that we've had here. We wanted to recreate the aircraft as it was in the 20s, and a lot of the structure, a lot of the internals had been updated. They were more modern. So our restoration crew in the basement had to spend extra time, almost 15 years, getting the interior just exactly perfect. Just a few years before this aircraft, Hugo Junkers invented this style of aircraft construction using corrugated aluminum, using substantially heavier components than most of the aircraft of that era. In fact, most people looked at the original Junkers that used this construction style and they weren't even sure it could fly. By the time Ford came up with this particular concept, it was thought that the corrugation would provide extra strength where you could reduce some of the internal structure. It's kind of a two-edged sword. That did help provide a more stable, stronger structure, but the trade-off was it's got incredible parasitic drag. It really goes a lot slower than it should with all that power. So it was definitely a trade-off. The corrugated skin was the wave of the future. It was a new thing back then, but the trade-offs turned out to be a little too much for the advantages that it provided. This is definitely one of the safest commercial airliners ever built. There were a couple of spectacular crashes caught on film. Newt Rockney was in one, several other people that were famous back then, but the aircraft itself proved extremely safe in service. It was kind of the introduction to flying in airliners for an entire generation of people.